Welcome to the Mondoweiss podcast. I'm your host, Dave Reed. At Mondoweiss, we cover the movements, activists, and policymakers who affect the struggle for freedom in Palestine. On August 18th of this year, the Israeli military raided the offices of 7 Palestinian civil society organizations. They ransacked the offices, stole files and other property, and sealed the doors in an attempt to prevent them from operating. 25 United Nations independent experts issued a declaration on August 24th condemning, quote, Israel's escalating attacks against Palestinian civil society. The declaration continued, these actions amount to severe suppression of human rights defenders and are illegal and unacceptable. These independent experts are calling on UN member states, quote, to take effective measures afforded by international law to put an end to these abuses. David Kattenberg spoke with 2 of the authors of the August 24th declaration. Francesca Albanese is the Special UN Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian Territory occupied since 1967. Mary Lawlor is Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders.
Hello, Francesca Albanese and Mary Lawlor. It's wonderful to be meeting up with you virtually. Francesca, you've just taken over recently as a special rapporteur on the human rights situation in the territories occupied by Israel since 1967. It's a very long title. When did you begin and how are you proceeding at the start of your tenure? Where are you at?
I started with this position on May 1st this year. So I am just past my 4th month as a special rapporteur.
And how are you proceeding?
Well, this first month, as for any position, have involved learning about the position, learning my support team and the partners, including the fellows, special rapporteurs, the Commission of Inquiry, familiarizing myself with the responsibility and rules that govern this position, trying to establish good relationship with relevant member states and regional groups, civil society, academia, but also I've tried to use this month to elaborate my visions, meaning what kind of special rapporteur I want to be. At the same time, the challenges have been many, have been extreme, because as I started, there was the court ruling which confirmed that the fact that the army could go ahead with the displacement of 1,200 people in Masafer Yatta, the largest incident of forcible transfers since 1967. And then a week later, there has been the killing of Shirin Abu Akleh, which is still waiting for a real probe that leads to accountability and justice. There has been a spike of arrest and detention. There have been 130 Palestinians killed from the beginning of this year, of course, including the 49 who were killing in a war that had no legal justification. The recent one in Gaza. So yeah, it was quite a busy time for me.
And have you communicated with Israel? Have you told them, introduced yourself and asked to enter into communication and asked to come and visit?
Yes, yes, of course. I've tried to meet with the permanent mission of Israel in Geneva, and unfortunately, the mission has declined my request for a visit. Individually and together with other rapporteurs, I have addressed communications asking about cases of concern that constitute violations of international law, human rights law, or humanitarian law. And I personally received no response, and I'm not engaged with the Israeli mission yet for a visit, but I plan to go in the coming months. So definitely, I'm going to do so.
And past rapporteurs, special rapporteurs, have not been able to get in since the end of Richard Falk's tenure, right? Michael Wink wasn't able to get in, and
yes, Michael applied for visa, sought authorization of Israel to facilitate his entry. The fact that Israel, this non-engagement is more than regrettable. There is a pattern of non-cooperation with the mandate by Israel. while open dialogue among all parties is essential for the protection and promotion of human rights. So this is also an obligation for Israel, and I do hope and expect that the government of Israel will engage with me. If not, at least it will not hamper my work. At least I should be allowed to go to the occupied Palestinian territory, over which it's necessary to remember Israel has no sovereignty. It's just the occupying power.
Mary Lawlor, how long have you been special rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders? And human rights defenders get persecuted and murdered all around the world. There are all sorts of places around the world where being a human rights defender is hazardous, if not potentially lethal. How does Israel compare? The various governments, the EU and its member states, and the UK and Canada and the United States say Israel is a paragon of human rights and democracy. But what's the status of human rights defenders, generally speaking, in Israel today and in the occupied territories?
Thank you for having me. And first of all, I will tell you that I have been in the mandate since May 2020. And in that time, I've written 10 communications, 10 formal letters to Israel about different human rights defenders who have been targeted and whose rights have been violated without any response, including the latest atrocity, for want of a better word, whereby Israel has raided and shut down 7 reputable, credible organized human rights organizations with human rights defenders in them. And I take a people-centered approach to the mandate. I know a few of the people involved in this shutdown. I have been to Israel, West Bank and Gaza myself twice, and I try and follow the situation. I've had many meetings with Palestinian human rights defenders over the last 2 years, and also with Israeli human rights defenders who are working on Palestine and other issues. So the kind of things that apart from this awful scourge of administrative detention, and, the lack of freedom of expression, the lack of ability to be free from discrimination, the lack of the right to freedom of opinion, of peaceful assembly, of freedom of association, all these rights have been undermined by Israel. And Israel, as you know, is a party to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. And these kind of rights are protected in these 2 covenants, which give force to the Universal Declaration. And so Israel is bound by the provisions by being party to these rights. And even if you take something like travel bans, and if you look at the Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, one of the rights is the right to physical and mental health. And we've seen so many examples of people who aren't allowed travel. Obviously, my mandate is human rights defenders, but you can see how all the rights are connected between economic, social and cultural rights and civil and political rights when people can't travel for treatment. And the defenders in Israel, in West Bank and Gaza can't even meet each other because of and they can't come outside. It's so rare for them to be able to come outside because of travel bans. Some of the communications I did this year, indeed, were on 2 of the organizations that have been cited as terrorist, the Bissan Center for Research and Development and Adamir. The director of Adamir and the director of the Bissan Center were both stopped from leaving. Despite having valid visas, they were both going to the US, and that, they weren't allowed. And then, of course, we have the whole thing about Pegasus, where Pegasus was found on the phones of the director of the Bissan Center and members of Al-Haq and Adamir. So this not only puts them in danger, but it puts all the people that they are in contact with in danger. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a start.
It does. And I'm Francesca, you may have a comment to add, but I'm wondering whether or not the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, whether they actually say anything specifically about the right of civil society organizations to defend human rights.
There is a specific declaration on human rights defenders, which was adopted unanimously by consensus in 1998, and it is the Declaration on Human Rights Defenders. Its long term is the right of all people and organizations to promote and protect human rights and fundamental freedoms. And Israel has agreed to that. And basically, it sets out the right to defend human rights and gives voice to the rights that are already protected in the covenants. And they are laid out, if you look at freedom of expression, we all know it's Article 19 of the covenant. And the right to freedom of opinion is 19. Peaceful assembly is Article 21. Freedom of association is Article 22. And everyone has the right to participate in public life, and that's Article 25. So all these things are spelled out, both in the Declaration on Human Rights Defenders and in the covenants which give force to the Universal Declaration. So, it's there. It's just that Israel is choosing to disregard it.
Francesca, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would like to add that, in fact, as far as I know, the director of Bisan is an American citizen. So in addition to what Mary said, the restriction, the prevention, the ban on traveling to the US was imposed on a US citizen. And this links to the responsibility of other member states to third parties, including the United States, to protect its citizens against abuses that might be committed by Israel or others. So what I would also like to say is that I fully agree with Mary with reference to the various provisions that she listed. And I would like to stress that they apply to everyone. Every woman and man, regardless of age, without any discrimination. So there is a heightened protection, if we want to call it this way, for human rights defenders, as highlighted by the adoption of this declaration, because over time it has become manifest that not only human rights defenders are necessary to preserve the civic space and the enjoyment of freedom as an extra layer of protection between the citizens and the government. This is the rationale, which is eroded. This is why, in the context of occupied Palestine, this is eroded. But also, Israel, as an occupying power, is also bound by the provisions to ensure public order and civic life, an orderly civic life under occupation. So not only it's bound under human rights law, but it also has occupying powers responsibilities. So what it's doing toward civil society is illegal, and it's part and parcel, if I may say, of an increasing tendency to shrink the space of human rights defenders and civil society. Part of the shrinking space is also, as Mary was saying, the mass spyware surveillance to monitor them. And even though there is such a level of surveillance, it's clear that there is no evidence, as we have declared as special rapporteurs in our public statements, there is no evidence of them being terrorists, as they have been accused. There is no evidence of them committing any illicit activity. In fact, there is evidence of the contrary, as demonstrated by various investigations that have been carried out.
And I was going to get to this. Israel's charges against the 6 Palestinian groups has been rejected by 9 EU member states in the middle of July. They said information provided to them by Israel lacked substance. No concrete and credible evidence substantiating Israel's allegations has ever been provided. Your own August 24 statement says the European Union's anti-fraud office has confirmed no suspicions of irregularities and or fraud. Even the Central Intelligence Agency in the United States has come up with nothing. And yet Israel continues to oppress, suppress these rights groups, invading their offices, threatening their staff. So my question is, well, I mean, I want to know how is it that Israel gets away with this, but what do you think Israel's motives are in doing this, right? Alleged membership in the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the PFLP affiliation, is their go-to reason for targeting human rights defenders. The human rights groups say this charge is completely specious, but is the rationale itself legitimate? Can one target human rights defenders because perhaps at some point when they were younger, they were an activist, a political activist in the PFLP or any other party?
I think the objective is to neutralize their work, stop their work, and cut off their funding. It's as simple as that. Israel does not want human rights defenders working and documenting and publicizing the attacks and injustice done to the Palestinians. So this is their tactic. And as far as the 9 states are concerned, of course, it is very good that they have come out, but they really have to use more leverage to stop these aggressive attacks and to get this designation of terrorists rescinded. And they also need to put in place proper political and financial support so that these people can continue to work. Because, for example, Al-Haq is still working, but they've been warned not to. And the next step could easily be that they'd be arrested and they need legal advice and they'll need money to continue the work. And the Netherlands, has been quite weak on the whole issue of the rights of the Palestinian people. So it would be good if they came more on board. And of course, the US, like 1 centimeter of the US is worth more than a meter of the EU. Sorry, Francesca, you're coming in there.
Again, I agree with what Mary said. There is probably another element that can be added. Because, David, you were asking, what is the rationale? What is the rationale now? Why just now? Because there has been an intensification of measures and efforts in crushing these particular organizations, including raiding their offices and threatening their staff. So these six organizations are at the forefront of the battle for international justice and accountability in the occupied Palestinian territory. So they're collecting evidence through their monitoring and reporting that can be part and parcel of their full engagement in the ongoing situation of Palestine case being investigated by the ICC. And they're also providing assistance to victims of daily violence at the end of the Israeli occupation system, including the armies, but also the settlers. So I do believe that it's legitimate to imagine that there is a link between this attempt at assuring accountability, meaning criminal liability of individuals involved in illegal activities in the OPT, by attacking them and their work. For example, seizing folders, computers. Israel might be, and I quote, destroying, tampering, or interfering with the collection of evidence, end of quote, of war crimes and crimes against humanity. And I'm quoting the statute of the their own statute, the statute of the International Criminal Court. So this might constitute a violation of the administration of criminal justice. So Israel is doing something else, which is absolutely prohibited under international law.
And I mean, you've raised an important point. Israel, the soldiers and police forces, border police have gone into all these offices and they've ransacked them and seized laptops and thumb drives and files that contain lots of highly privileged information and testimony and accounts and personal information pertaining to women and children. ordinary individuals who are having a hard time of it under permanent military occupation. And the Israeli forces can now use this information. It's like busting into a lawyer's office and seizing all of her or his files, or into a doctor's office and seizing all the files that contain information that's highly privileged. Thoughts on this?
Yes. This is, there are so many problematic aspects. So this is why I say not only it's a violation of human rights, but it's also a violation of the administration of justice. So this will all feed into, I hope, the investigation of the ICC.
Mary?
I agree with everything that Francesca has said, and would just like to endorse that. I mean, it is true. It's much broader and wider than just attacks against individuals. It's a whole suffocation of civil society and human rights defenders, with the ramifications of the ICC and the lack of funding and all the other things that are going in. If you recall, the first organization that was shut down last summer was the Union of Health Work Committees, and that was in August, and it was almost like a trial run for the 6 that were attacked lately.
Which is astonishing. In the middle of the COVID pandemic, they were arresting health workers.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Salah Hamuri, this individual. He's a member of the Adamir Prisoner Support and Human Rights Association. He's been in and out of jail, Israeli prisons, since I think he was like 16 years old. And he's gone through various rounds of administrative detention. And he's just been issued a brand new dose of administrative detention, has just been renewed. Have you been following his case?
Yeah, I mean, I think special procedures have sent three formal communications on his case: October 20, August 21, November 21. No response from Israel, and the communications expressed concern about the possible revocation of his permanent residency, but the authorities went ahead, ignored that, and then after the official notice was given, we again raised the concerns, and as you said, he's been in detention since 2022. It's very difficult. Maybe Francesca will bring a new breath of fresh air to this, but it's very difficult to have impact on the Israelis because of just the non-engagement.
There are, totally. I mean, I hope I will be able to bring some fresh air, but it's very difficult because of this pattern of non-engagement, but also because of this sense of acquiescence among the international community, that apart from condemnation toward Israel on what happens, there is very little concrete action. Salah Hamuri, for me, is emblematic nowadays because he's a French Palestinian lawyer, and he's from Jerusalem. So he's been, as you were saying, David, arrested many times since he was 16-year-old. And the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, which is another, like Mary and me, is another special procedure mandate holder, is a collegial body which only looks at cases of detention, has expressed concern over his detention as arbitrary and violating norms of fair trial. Now, this recent administrative detention is particularly worrisome to me because it's based on a secret file, and based on this secret file, he risks the revocation of his residency in Jerusalem on the ground of breach of allegiance to Israel. So why it's worrisome for me? First of all, Israel cannot compel the occupied population, anyone among the occupied people, to swear allegiance to it, because Israel is, like under international law, is the hostile power occupying power toward the Palestinians. So it would be a dangerous precedent, but also the revocation of residency for Jerusalemites is unfortunately happening. It's not new, but it has not happened on a secret file yet. And this is why it's absolutely important that there is a strong response and strong mobilization on Salah's case.
And Salah Hamuri, he was born in Jerusalem.
Yes. Yeah, so his life is in Jerusalem. So his mom is French, but his center of life, sticking to the vocabulary in the Israeli procedures, his center of life is Jerusalem. So I do not see why Israel should go ahead on this revocation. If someone makes any wrongdoing, there is a law to comply with, fine. But the way Israel engages with particular individuals, especially human rights defenders, is prima facie persecutorial to me.
And he's being held in Hadarim prison, I understand, inside Israel, within the Green Line. I mean, along with hundreds and hundreds. I think most Palestinian detainees, prisoners, are being held inside prisons inside the Green Line, which is flagrantly illegal under the Fourth Geneva Convention.
This is correct. The occupied population should not be detained outside the occupied territory. But it's the overall situation of the deprivation of liberty, arrest and detention in the occupied Palestinian territory is extremely problematic because, first of all, there is a large recourse to arrest and detention, which in a significant number of cases is then condemned as arbitrary by a number of national and international observers, and it's on the basis of a problematic anti-terrorism legislation, which is also often abused. So because this is so, the magnitude of the problem is such, this is why I've decided to focus on the deprivation of liberty in all its manifestation in the OPT in my next report.
Do you think, talking about specific things that the international community can do you think that they should consider or actually proceed to rescind the terrorist designation against the PFLP? I'm not sure if you want to weigh in on this, but, the EU and its member states and Canada and the United States formally consider the PFLP to be a terrorist organization, and it is the go-to organization if you want to accuse a human rights defender of terrorism and throw them in jail. You label them as a PFLP activist. It's the whole rationale behind the targeting of the 6 Palestinian organizations. So might there be a good sense for the international community to rescind this designation?
Look, the designation of terrorism is not uncommon to a situation like the one the Palestinians are experiencing, meaning one of subjugation, people under foreign rule for decades. This is a tool that powers in a dominant position use to advance the repression of the subjugated population. We shouldn't forget that even Nelson Mandela was considered a terrorist in apartheid South Africa. I'm not sure I want to comment necessarily on the designation of this particular party, because I think that the question should be broader. Israel's presence in the OPT is what triggers this instability and this level of violence. Because as I've said before, in order to keep an entire people under occupation for 55 years, you need a lot of violence because you are repressing their rights every day. And of course, this will trigger violence in response. There is only one way to to bring peace to that place. And it's by ensuring freedom. And we get to freedom through complying with international law. International law, and this is what, the most central point to me to answer your question, David. People have a right to self-determination. The Palestinian people have the right of self-determination, which is ultimately the right to exist as a people and also the right to resist as a people. And therefore, any consideration of designation of terrorism, how to approach political forces on the ground should be addressed against this background. What are the means for the Palestinians to resist the occupation? First and foremost, the international law should be the guide for it. And the Palestinians, frankly, over time have resorted to peaceful resistance, legal resistance. Look at the work of the 6 NGOs. And even that is impossible to protect. This is a dangerous signal that we are sending to the Palestinians under occupation.
Do occupied people or oppressed, subjugated people have the right to resist?
Yes.
Under international law?
They do. They do. And it has been firmly and repeatedly affirmed by the United Nations General Assembly as of the 60s. This is from the 60s, actually from the 50s and 60s and through the 70s. These are the years of the decolonization process, where the equality of all people and the self-determination of all people has been firmly recognized, and any foreign rule or alien domination has been condemned and has been prohibited and even recognized as an act of aggression by the United Nations. So while this was happening, David, within the United Nations, within the General Assembly, the Palestinians were experiencing, as of 1967, a new type of those manifestations that today we do not hesitate to define colonialism, occupying a people's territory, preventing them from exercising the right of self-determination, seizing their resources, exploiting them, preventing the enjoyment of any basic rights. I mean, this is what determines, first of all, an obligation of all states to act in support of the Palestinians, but also this leads to recognize a right to resist of the Palestinians because they are a population under a prolonged and unlawful occupation.
Is this apartheid? Do you use that word?
I do, yes. I mean, it's fully documented that Israel has been practicing the crime of apartheid in the occupied Palestinian territory and over the Palestinians more broadly. This has been documented by the Palestinians and Israeli international organizations, reputable international organizations, including my predecessor, and there has been this discussion concerning apartheid, frankly, since John Dugard. John Dugard was the first special rapporteur on occupied Palestinian territory to use the concept of apartheid. Said Israel, I think it was in 2007, Israel, some of the practices that Israel imposes over the Palestinian, I mean, I'm not quoting verbatim, but resemble apartheid. It was in 2007. And the situation has only gone worse. So my point is, yes, it is apartheid, but the dismantlement of the apartheid, which is necessary, is not the only thing that is to be pursued. Because there is also, again, Palestinians have the sovereignty over the occupied Palestinian territory, which was a compromised position. The PLO came to between the late 80s and the 90s. There is international consensus that it should be that. And which doesn't, again, this is said with no prejudice to the right of self-determination of the Palestinians outside the OPT. But within the occupied territory, it's clear that Israel has no sovereignty, so it has no right to keep any presence, including not only military, but also the settlements.
Francesca Albanese and Mary Lawlor, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for listening to our show. Visit our site to sign up for free daily and weekly newsletters on Palestine, Israel, and related U.S. politics. If you're enjoying our podcast, please consider becoming a donor by visiting mondoweiss.net/donate. Mondoweiss is a nonprofit publication, and every donation of any amount helps sustain our work. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, and please leave a rating and review to help other listeners find our show.